United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And the next item of business will be roll call, and I will start on my right tonight. That'll be Roisin.
Roisin O'Farrell.
Rituja Indapure.
Oh, you guys just have to share microphones. It looks.
Yeah, it's on. Joyce Bottenberg with the Health and Human Service Commission.
C.J. Kaler with the Human Services Commission.
Brooks, Planning Commission.
Shanna Collins, Planning Commission.
Larry Crandall, Planning Commission.
Stan Gano, Human Services Commission.
Mark Boffman, Planning Commission.
Jane Garrison, Planning Commission.
Excellent. So we have all 7 planning commissioners present this evening, as well as 3 commissioners from the Human Services Commission. Welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. And so the next item of business is the approval of the agenda. Is there any objection to approving the agenda tonight? Seeing no objection, the agenda is so approved. The next item of business is the approval of the minutes. And actually, I would like to make an amendment to the minutes for March 15th, 2018 meeting to include just a very small statement that because of technical difficulties, the meeting could not be videotaped. And that's all. Would there be any other amendments to the March 15th meeting minutes? No. Then I just need a motion since we amended them. Just a motion to approve the amended minutes.
I move to approve the amended minutes.
And a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to amend the minutes from March 15th, 2018. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed say no. And the motion carries 7-0. The next item of business is public comment. So this is the time for non-agenda items tonight. Anyone who wants to speak will have 3 minutes to speak, or 5 minutes if you're an organization. Is there anyone who'd like to speak during the non-agenda? Ms. Wichter? Mrs. Wichter.
My husband will be happy for that correction. I should have a PowerPoint for Kevin. So I'm speaking to non-agenda because you have the sign code amendments, which will be coming up at your...
Mary, is that on?
Yes, I just turned it on.
Okay, thanks.
The sign code amendments will be coming back in front of you for public hearing on the 19th. One of the topics is the electronic reader boards, and I wanted to give you some visual historical information regarding those because the city of Sammamish actually has 4 of those in the city. The code for the pilot program was deleted last year, and it was available for 5 years just for schools. So this is the East Lakes High School electronic reader board. It was out recently because they are doing some updating, but originally the cost of that was $50,000 or more. It was installed in 2009 and fully in by 2010. I happened to be a parent at the school at the time. Central Washington got added to our city. They have an interest in the possibility of having an electronic signboard, and I know Eastside Catholic was interested, but they missed the period during the pilot when it was offered, so they're still interested. And this is the one from Skyline High School. It's a monument style versus the other ones. It's also multicolor. They use the bottom there as a banner to try to get people to get jobs or apply to their school or district. This is also not a monument sign. This is Columbia Athletic Clubs. It's over by the QFC in Pine Lake. And you can see the size of it in comparison to the other signs in the vehicle there. And there's also a stormwater facility that it's implemented by. It does change messages every 3 minutes because that used to be the old standard, which means when you're displaying time of day, it gets behind because it can only update every 3 minutes. This is one at Washington Federal. It's a bank. It's over by Starbucks by East Lake High School. It just has that red strip, so it's a running script, and it's on 2 sides of the building. I have seen it use message sequencing, and we've also talked about whether red letters should be allowable or not, but I wanted to make sure that you knew that was there. And you can kind of see the person down there walking through, so you can kind of see the size of the building and how high it's located. In fact, I didn't even know it was there until I started looking for them. There are exempt signs in the city. For example, fuel price signs are not counted in the signs for like the Shell station, for example. And just right behind it is that Columbia Fitness sign, if you can see that. And then these signs are also exempt. These are anytime there's work or construction, and I think most of the standard codes are written for them, the 10-inch and 14-inch letter sizes. These display about every 2 seconds, so you'll see the sign go like this as you're driving, so you'll be able to read it. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that these were in the city, that they are functioning, because I hope it will be incorporated in some of the discussions that you have. So I'm submitting my input early. You do have an upcoming public hearing on it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak tonight? Okay. All right, so the public comment section is closed, and the next item of business is old business. And tonight we just have one item down for old business, and we will be revisiting the housing strategy. And this is, I don't know, 4th, 5th work session on the housing strategy update. So what is unique about this meeting is that we have 3 members from the Human Services Commission to help us in our endeavor tonight. And I will turn it over to staff just so that the commissions know sort of the format for tonight. We'll have a presentation from staff first. Then we're going to move to Exhibit 1 and go over the exercise together and talk about some of each commissioner's actual priorities when it comes to addressing some of the housing types and household types that have been identified in Exhibit 1. Then we will move on to Exhibit 2 and actually sort of start doing some brainstorming on the strategies. And I'm going to try out the round robin method of doing brainstorming. So we'll see how that works out tonight. But that's going to be for Exhibit 2. And we're also hoping to have a discussion on neighborhood character, which we'll either incorporate with the round robin or we'll have in a different format. I'm actually not sure yet, so we'll see how that goes. And just wanted everybody to know that we have a lot to do tonight. And so just try to keep anything we say or do concise and direct and to the point so that we can really get through and make an impact on the strategy tonight.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Chair, I just want to. Can I ask you to make a clarification in case
Yes.
somebody's watching on TV that we are using our iPads to
Yes.
follow along with the notes and it's not any other communication? Thank you.
Very good comment. The commission, the Planning Commission, has brand new iPads. All 7 of us have iPads. We are now accessing all of our packet material on the iPads. So my agenda's on the iPad, everything's on here. So we will be looking at these devices. That's all we use them for. It's just replacing our paper essentially. So that is what we're looking at. And if we look confused, that's why, because it's a lot. It's a big change. So we're all acknowledging that. So thank you, Ratuja. That makes sense. Okay, so now I will turn it over to staff and see what they have to say.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Collins. Good evening, Human Services Commissioners and Planning Commissioners. My name is Doug McIntyre. I'm a planner with the Department of Community Development. To my right is Arthur Sullivan with ARCH, and then to his right is Mike Stenger with ARCH. By now, you are hopefully familiar with the team working on Sammamish Homegrown, our update to our 2006 Housing Strategy Plan. So again, tonight is the first joint work session. So that's why you see joint work session number 1 on the screen here. We've had a variety of, we've had kickoff, we've had a couple work sessions. So I'm trying to keep it all clear. And Exhibit 4 in your packet hopefully does a good job of explaining the meeting recap for each of these meetings. So they all, hopefully it all gels and it's easy to understand. Okay, so tonight we have really 3 topics to cover, and the first one is pretty quick. The meaty part of tonight's agenda is conducting our exercise on housing gaps, and I'll get into that shortly here. And then following the exercise, as Chair Collins pointed out, we will have a preliminary discussion on housing strategies. So this train has left the station. We're somewhere in the middle of the update, and we're really transitioning into some pretty substantive conversations about the strategies that we want to implement in our updated housing strategy plan. And I think that's going to be a really good part of this process. And then we'll open it up for Q&A, and I'll make a couple brief notes about the process at the end of the presentation, and then we'll move on from there. So I have this slide on all of our presentations because I think it's always good to do a refresher on the purpose, where we're going, and then talk a little bit about the role tonight. So as I mentioned, we're right in the middle of this update, and we're trying to distill the 2015 comp plan housing policies into near-term actions that we can implement over the next plus or minus 5 years. So it really transforms our policies into a work program that's achievable on a short-term basis. So that's the overall purpose, and tonight the purpose is really to provide some direction to staff on how the commissioners feel about the different gap areas, the different needs in the city, and really give us some good input on that. And I'll go through the instructions for that as we get closer to it. And I always have this little graphic on the bottom here because I think it's always good to just really summarize the effort here. We're taking all these disparate parts and ideas and a lot of things. Housing is a complex topic. Housing covers a ton of different subtopics, and there's a lot that goes into it. So we're trying to get all those different parts and really bring everybody up to speed to really take that next step and conceptualize the end product, which is our housing strategy plan, and then move it toward a proposal that City Council can take, review, and really prioritize, and then hopefully adopt. Okay, so I want to do a brief note on the different roles, because I think that's a really relevant topic for tonight as we have both commissions here. We want to talk about who's doing what and why do we have everybody here tonight. So starting with the Human Services Commission, the Human Services Commission as a newer commission to the city, I think really has some great input for staff in the two categories of housing affordability and special needs housing. So we really want the Human Services Commissioners to provide us some direct feedback on those two topics. The Planning Commission will focus on those two topics as well, but in addition to 3 other topics. So the way that I would view this in some sense is that it's a little bit more of a limited role, but it's still an advisory role, and we're going to take that input and move it toward our legislative review with City Council. So the Planning Commission is really the lead advisory body, and the Planning Commission has a major role in developing the plan as well as participating in the public outreach. And I'll make a note about that at the end of the meeting, but we really want the commissioners to identify the housing strategies, focus less on the ranking of those strategies, but focus more on the identification. That's the real heavy lifting for Planning Commission. We'll leave the ranking, we'll have some discussion on the ranking, but we'll leave the real heavy lift on that for City Council. And then ultimately, there will be a formal recommendation from the Planning Commission to City Council for their consideration. And then, as I've alluded to, once it gets to City Council, it'll really get into the kind of sausage making, if you will, of the plan, and that lies with the ranking and the priorities. And they will definitely have some input on identification of strategies, but the hope is that by the time Planning Commission and Human Services Commission have kind of passed it on, it's got a pretty good list of strategies there. And then, of course, ultimately, City Council will be the adopting body for this. Okay, so with that out of the way, I do want to give a brief note about our housing supply and just what we mean when we say gaps and needs, and then that'll help us lead into the exercise that we have. So you've all seen this graphic at this point. It's an Arch-developed graphic, and I think it does a good job of kind of explaining with the text on the right side the ways in which the city can have an influence on housing supply in the city. And then on the left side, we're talking about the different types of housing and the different types of households that we deal with. So if you refer back to one of or I guess it was the December 6th, I believe, work session with Planning Commission, Arch did a really good job of going through the different ways that the city can influence housing. And they broke it down into 3 main categories. One is through our land use regulations. The second is through direct assistance, whether that's through funding or other sorts of support to directly serve low-income populations. And then through indirect means, whether that's through, for instance, donation of land to a nonprofit for development of affordable housing. So there's a variety of tools that we have, and they all impact the housing supply. And then when we say housing gaps, I know that that kind of seems like it might be a loaded term. It also could be a little bit confusing of what we mean, but really just boiling it down, it means what are the gaps between our housing goals and policies and the projected or current conditions in the city with regard to housing. Sometimes we use that term in relation to the housing supply, whether that means, for instance, a gap between the amount of senior housing available and the need for that housing. That could be an example of a housing gap when it's related to the housing supply. And then why is that important? Well, a couple reasons. One is because we want to do a better job of meeting the demand with the supply, kind of a basic concept there, but we want to make sure that we do our best to address the needs of our residents and our future residents. And then also it helps us to identify the areas that we want to focus on. What are the populations or household types that are underserved? And then what are some housing or development types that are either undersupplied or maybe oversupplied? Okay, so with that out of the way, I do want to conduct the exercise that we had briefly talked about with the Planning Commission on March 1st. But I'll go through the instructions here. I view it as kind of two big pieces. So the first part in the packet, Exhibit 1, the commissioners all had a chance to look at what the city felt based on the data and our experiences implementing our zoning code were the gaps. And that was specifically requested by the Planning Commission, that some of the commissioners felt like, well, we want the city to tell us what they feel the gaps are to kind of put the stake in the ground, and then we'll respond to that and tell you what we think in addition to that. So I think that was actually a really good point, and I hopefully it came across in the exhibit. But what I want to do with regard to that is get each commissioner's feedback. What are your kind of initial reactions to that? Did we say something that was completely off base in your opinion, or something that you thought was dead on? So we'll do a round of that, and then once we do that, I'm hoping to then move on to asking each commissioner to give us his or her preference for the top 3 gap areas. So what do you feel like are the 3 most important gap areas? And that could be an area that we need to address further. I think it could also be an area that you feel maybe we've completely addressed and don't pay too much mind to it. So it's really up to each commissioner, but we want to get the top 3 from each of you. And I think that'll really help us talk about strategies. So with that being said, I will move the presentation along to, this is straight out of Exhibit 1, and this is in relation to the household types. So you've seen this table before. We've, on the left column, have different household types that we know are in Sammamish. And then on the top row, on the right columns, we have different breakouts for household income levels. So we have very low, low, moderate, middle, and upper. And we added the 2 columns on the right as a way to address commentary we heard at the last meeting about, well, yes, we know that we have low, very low, and moderate income levels, but we want to also talk about the upper income levels as well. So I think that was good to add that column in there. And in this table, you'll notice, I want to point out 2 things real quick. The very first row it says any, and what we mean by that is if you feel that regardless of income level, that household type is either underserved or overserved or adequately served. So it's just a way that you don't have to have an arrow in every single column. You can just say, okay, in all of these categories, we feel that this deserves whatever arrow you feel like. And then similarly on the first column, the same idea there, that we felt like to just summarize it, we have the any column for any of those household types. So I'll stop talking briefly and just maybe turn it over to Chair Collins to see if you would like to either go one by one or open it up generally to respond to this.
Let's just open it up generally. Commissioner Boffman?
Okay, I had 2 questions. How did you guys arrive and gals arrive at this? In other words, is it just perception, subjective? Was there any objective approach? I actually was one of the ones that made the comment about, in the last discussion that you referred to. And I guess I'm wondering, is there any objective analysis, math, or facts and figures that go with this? Or is it just kind of subjective, which is what we were talking about at that time?
Yeah, so this is objectively from the city standpoint based on the data. So in Exhibit 1, we do have the data breakouts to help support the reasons behind the arrows. We worked with Arch and city staff to rely on the data to really help us identify the gap areas. So I don't know if, Mike, do you want to add anything to the, okay. Yeah, so we did use data.
Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure.
Not extensively, but just,
Sure.
you know, what, so if we said that moderate income couples with children, is there some math that gets you to underserved or adequately served?
Sure, yeah. So one of the, I'll refer back to Exhibit 1. And so underneath the tables, we had the data summary. So we kind of pulled out some of the main commentary points that we wanted to make. But then also we referred back to the data that was presented in, I believe it was the February 2nd meeting, February 1st meeting. And so, for instance, the first bullet there under data summary for household types. So household types and sizes, 40% of all, let's see, so a better example, under housing types. So housing supply and variety, 85% of Sammamish's housing units are single-family detached. 91% of those units are, let me rephrase that. 91% of the owner-occupied units are single-family detached. 53% of the renter-occupied units are single-family detached. So then we use that kind of data to inform the housing types in the second part of that table that, for instance, the upper income column for single-family detached has a up arrow. So based on what we know our housing stock to be, we feel like that's adequately served. So that's hopefully a easy to understand way to show that it relates back to that data. So again, the single-family detached home ownership row under the housing types, and the upper income is appropriately served.
I think what Mr. Boffman is asking for, or I don't know, if you want to go, do you want to go? And I feel the same way. I want it to be, so you've got single family detached, you've got this exhibit down here, this is exhibit 5, and it says that, 42%, or that's not going to work for the detached. It just, I want to know exactly how do you do housing type and affordability at the same time? How do you say that there's single family detached, there's this many of them, and then this many of them are affordable to these columns? Is that, it's like, how do you do that math? I don't even know
Right.
how.
I think the challenge I have in understanding it is kind of the same question I had when we originally talked about this is without, and maybe this is just being too engineering, but if you said that we have this many moderate income families, but we only have this many households that they could consider based on that income level, that would generate a statistical gap. But when we say some of these are underserved, it seems like it ignores the supply-demand part of it. I don't know how many very low and low income or moderate and middle income folks there are, and we could create lots of those households, but is there really a demand for that? And that, again, what I'm thinking is that it would be, in an ideal world, it would be great to have some objective data to say, we know that there's a group of low income folks that are looking for housing in Sammamish and can't find it, and here's how we know that. Right now, a lot of this seems like this is what we feel or this is what we perceive, and that might be right, but without some objectivity, there's a potential for missing things that are, it seems to me that there may be a potential for missing what are real gaps.
So may I
Yeah.
try and help? So you're right, this is not an exact science, and we didn't try to make it that way exactly, but we do feel that the data that we have is, if we felt it was strong enough, then we would indicate it with one of the arrows. If we didn't feel like we had a strong enough indicator, then we left the cell blank. But referring to the, and I don't mean to suggest that, what we've done here isn't debatable or, there isn't room for difference of conclusions, because there certainly are. But if I could draw your attention to figure 12, for example, which is the bars that go across the page. It's on page 7 of the packet, I believe.
Page 15 of 37.
Right, thank you. So this doesn't show the Sammamish household incomes, but it does show the county-wide need. And the reason that we do that is because of the county-wide policy that's also reflected in your comprehensive plan, which says that each city will try in one way or another to address the income or the housing needs of all income groups. So those income groups reflect 12% of the households are very low income, 12% are low income, and 16% are moderate income. Unfortunately, we don't have that middle ground, but the next bar below that is the affordability of Sammamish housing. And so it's practically indistinguishable how much of that is affordable at very low and low income and 5% at moderate income. So we felt pretty comfortable saying that there's basically a deficit of housing units that are affordable at those very low, and moderate income levels. Middle income, definitely has a higher level of supply. Again, we don't know exactly what it is. And then we felt confident in saying that upper income households, their needs are being met by that in the sense of being able to find housing. So that takes care of the bulk of the arrows in that chart that's up on the screen right now.
To add, I think your point about how do you know what your demand is, that's a hard one to ascertain. But with many of the cities in East King County, one place we look is at the work. We look at a couple things. One, we look at data on your workforce and what the salaries are of your workforce versus how much housing in your community is affordable at that income level. And so there's no guarantee that somebody would want to earn, somebody in your community who works here necessarily wants to live here, because we also showed you data, if you recall, about how many people are commuting in and out of the city, both for their jobs in the city as well as jobs outside the city. But your community is creating through its workforce a demand for an income profile based on your salaries of jobs in the community. And a lot of them are lower and moderate paying. So that's another way of looking at, well, that makes a little more logical conclusion that people might want to live here at those different income levels. Another piece of data that sort of helps show us that there may be a gap is the cost burden information that we provided you. And it does show that not only in East King County, but in your community, those who are low income and very low income are almost always paying a significant portion of their income to live in the community. So that's also another form of demonstrating that for those income levels, the people who are in your community, they are burdened, and they want to be here, obviously, because they're living here, but they're burdened in order to be there. So I think, as Mike was saying, it's not a perfect science because people are living places, but are they living where they would like to ideally live or not? But are you seeing things in your data that gives some level of indication that there may be gaps in those areas? So one of the reasons why we're bringing this to you here is for you to have a conversation, and you're looking at the data to see whether or not you think some of the arrows are misplaced or not. And so we took a first stab. That's what you asked us to do. Now it's open to you, and we've tried to include some of the data, but you do also have, we gave you a couple months ago, the full needs analysis that has even more data. And so we just, Mike and Doug went through all of that and looked through it all to help try to identify some gap areas. So, and this is what we're here for tonight. If you, from looking at the data or from other perspectives, because you're residents of the community, would be able to say, I wonder, do we have this all right? Or should we look at it a little bit differently?
Go ahead, Commissioner Garrison.
Well, you asked at the beginning if you thought you could make improvements in this, or if you were dead on, and I thought you were dead on. I think it's overwhelming what's being shown by the graphs and charts for what we see out there. We know what we see. I think our common sense tells us that that's true, and then this all backs it up. So I'm convinced. I don't need a lot of numbers, and I think this shows exactly what I thought.
Commissioner Brooks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a great job. It's always easy to edit something, right? So this is nice to have. It's, it allows us to do. I think that it also represents a lot of the data that's in the charts. There are other kind of maybe anecdotal data points that lead me to believe that in this case of the slide we're looking at, the couples without children, empty nesters, and couples with children, smaller families, large families, I mean, I'm one of those, and I feel that middle income is fairly underserved as well. So I'm wondering why the data didn't really maybe indicate that one way or the other, since it was left blank. Do you want to take that? And I guess furthermore, if I may, it would be nice to have a little more resolution on some of these too. And the upper, I mean, upper seems to take care of this huge chunk, which I think we should understand a little bit more about within that. Because when you look down below, it takes 120 AMI just to, you can't even buy a house for that here. So if that upper is kind of going from 80 on up, is that the deal? Or is it
No,
100 up?
I should add a little bit of clarity to that. So thank you for bringing that up. When we say, the columns up here at the title, very low, low, moderate, middle, and upper, what we mean by that are, so I'll start with the very low. Those are terms that are established by HUD. So very low is usually, generally speaking, 30% of the area median income and lower. Right. Low is 50% and lower. Moderate is 80% and lower. And then when we talk about middle, we really talk about between 100% and 120, and then upper is beyond that. So that'll hopefully provide a little bit more clarity. We took those off at this one because it felt like that kind of distracted from the previous meetings, from the discussions we were having, and felt like it was easier just to talk about it in those terms. But maybe we can add in the actual income brackets that we're talking about.
Right, that would be helpful, I think, with more resolution, because if we find that this upper, we're talking like it's 5 times AMI is what we're talking about. It paints a different picture than if it's 150. And how much of that big chunk is that? Because I think there's a large, the graphs kind of show that there's a huge portion in that upper part, and I think it would be helpful. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
In this conversation here, I'd like you to also keep something else in mind as you're asking your questions or making your comments. The purpose of this exercise is to help create a bridge for you and a tool for you that, from all the work we've done in the previous 3 or 4 meetings where we've just been talking about what your housing supply looks like and what your housing needs look like, to later tonight we're going to start we got a really long matrix of a lot of different things that you could work on. And this is meant to sort of give you a tool that you can refer to help you when you get to the real meat of the work of the group, which is to take this long list of strategies and start figuring out which ones you might want to prioritize. So keep that in mind in looking at this document. It's really meant to be for that purpose, is to help create a bridge document that you can use to help you in your next step.
Do you have anything else, Eric?
Well, so not on this slide anyway.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners?
I guess I'd like to, I have a clarifying question for you, Mr. McIntyre. So it seems like, at least in this section, and in the lower section, this is not as much the case, but is our purpose, and that's probably written in here and I've forgotten what it said, is our purpose in this discussion to focus on housing affordability in Sammamish, or is our purpose to develop a housing strategy that addresses what we believe are the ongoing needs for people that want housing in Sammamish? Because I ask that because this seems like a fairly broad stroke of saying everybody in the upper income is fine. We're not going to talk about them because they're fine. Everybody that's got middle income and below, they don't have adequate housing, and that's what we're addressing. That's what this top section says to me. And I'm not sure that's wrong. Well, I am sure that's wrong. But I'm not sure that maybe there's some granularity that goes with that Eric was suggesting. But what is our purpose in this discussion? Because it seems like we're almost entirely focused on affordability. I realize the section below gets past that a bit. But I worry that we're not addressing, for example, people who want to retire and move to a smaller house. I personally know several people like that can't. They have plenty of money. They're not low income, they're not middle income, but there's no housing available. So I think that focusing strictly on income level can be a little bit of a detractor from the fact that what we've got going on in Sammamish is lack of development of diverse types of housing that different kinds of people might be able to access.
Yeah, so there is a lot in that question, but the first part of it, affordability is part of it. It's one of the 5 categories. So we are talking about the 5 categories. All 5 of them are going to be part of the plan. But right now we are talking about the household types and housing types. And the natural way that those tend to break out is with the table that we've drawn up here. I do want to point out that we did actually address empty nesters and downsizers in the second row there. And again, to Mike Stanger's point, when a box is empty, it means that we don't have enough confidence to assign an arrow there. Doesn't mean that we're saying it's not a gap. It's just something that we don't have the full confidence as we do when we assign the arrows. And I think definitely part of tonight is hearing your feedback. We want to know exactly what you're saying. So if you feel that that is something in the upper column that we are not addressing, then absolutely that's something that we should hear from you. So yeah, that's all part of it.
So I'm going to, what you have up here is only part of what was in your packet, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
So
I'll have the second one down. It's the next slide.
Is it? Okay, so, right, so to point out on that slide is you will see there and a little bit different, and this is where maybe a little bit better job with the top half, but you can see here, this is now housing types, and you'll notice that for senior housing, to the exact point that you raised, that it just put one arrow under any. So that implied there is a housing type for all types of households that could be a gap area. And so a correction you may want to suggest is on the top half, why not have that arrow for the upper income as well, where we talk about the seniors, and because that's what we're sort of saying in the lower half of the chart, in the second part. And that's what the conversation is meant to be here. We're not saying we got everything right and might be, but to your point, you can see here there's a number of categories of housing type gaps that we think exist that would apply to potentially any income level.
So I think we're on the same page. I think we're saying the same thing. We're just maybe skipping a step, and maybe we can get there if that's okay. Do we want to just dive into the assigning of the priorities?
Well, can you go up to the one we were on? What about actually putting a down arrow on the couples without children in the any column?
Yeah, that's certainly something. So I would prefer to leave that for the actual exercise part of it. So this is the
okay, we're just talking about it.
The first step in the how do the commissioners react to the city's identification?
Okay.
And then the second part, which I'll get to, is a blank table, the same table but blank. And then I will take the top 3 from each of you and add those arrows in so that we can see where everybody's starting to kind of focus on and what are the preferred gap areas that the commissioners would like us to focus some strategies on. So again, I think we are all on the same page. I think we're getting there, and we do want that feedback. So if you don't agree, that's absolutely what we want to hear.
Madam Chair, I have a clarifying question.
Yeah.
So, Doug, do you want 3 from the housing types and then 3 from household type?
Yes, that's correct. And I think I briefly mentioned it earlier that you could assign a down arrow saying, hey, you need to focus on this, or you could assign an up arrow that says, I feel like you don't need to focus on this. So just some combination of that. You can feel free to do all 3 as a need area, a gap area, or the opposite of that. We really just want to hear top 3. And further clarity on that is, I'm saying the top 3, but if you want to talk to me further and afterwards, please do. I'm just doing it for the to respect people's time. So,
Any comments from the Human Services Commission? Is there anyone who'd like to add any insights?
Well, I would just say, for me, this is my 3rd meeting. First one was all procedural. Second one was a little getting oriented. In the task force, which 2 of the 3 of us were involved in, we didn't talk at all about housing.
Okay.
So this is all new
Brand new.
information to us that we were given to see ahead of time, but trying to put some meat to it and figure out where are we going. I don't think I have anything to add at this point because I don't know enough.
Okay. I completely understand. I just wanted to put that opportunity out there if there is anything on your mind.
I got a green light, good. The data looks great. My only question is, because the Human Services side is also looking at people with disabilities and special needs, is there a reason that, you went almost 30 years from the 35 to 64-year-olds, and everything else was, 18-year gap or less? That seems like a big group that probably should have been broken up into 2 areas so that more would probably fall under the seniors, or where does that demographic really fall?
So that's a good question. It is a little bit of a broad brush when you look at the breakout, and there are some further granularity to those categories. However, when we deal with data, a lot of times we either use census data or other sorts of housing data, and sometimes we're just at the whim of how the Census Bureau breaks it out. I can't speak exactly to those age brackets. I don't know if, Mike, do you have any further clarity on that?
Well, this came from, I believe it was from the Human Services profile report. It was prepared by a consultant, but I do believe that it was also from American Community Survey Census Bureau data, and that's probably the age categories that were available.
So you're saying the Census Bureau does a 30-year group and an 18-year group?
I suspect so, but I'd have to look at the source tables to know for sure.
Okay.
And
My only concern, and it's me, and it may involve other people, from going from 35 to 64, I'm way over 35, not quite to 64, but, that's the senior side that is looking at downgrading, going to a ranch-style house, and that would come into play with the housing types that we may need, when you break out that age demographic.
So my guess, and what we'll do, is we can go back and look at the source of this in the ACS to see if it is broken out further. My guess is that the consultant was trying to group maybe some age categories together, and they basically picked very young children, school-age children, young adults, seniors, and then everyone in between that. So it's sort of like the starting, because I've been doing this stuff a long time, and these are kind of age ranges. But if you'd like, we can go back to the ACS data and see if it's the typical 10 to 15-year time window, age windows, and provide that.
Well, I appreciate it, but I think that the figure is trying to address the disability side more than the age group side.
No, I understand, but I'm saying that that's
Right,
often.
I understand.
So we'll go back and look and see if it's a little more fine-grained in the ACS. If the ACS is not more fine-grained, they sometimes have to do that given statistical type stuff, but that doesn't seem to make sense here because that age group has the biggest number, so you would assume. So we'll go back and look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to do the priorities.
Okay.
And how do you want, you're just going to go one by one?
Yeah, so I will give a brief set of instructions here. I think I've pretty much covered it, but I wanted to have it on the slide just for everybody's benefit. So again, we want you to think about whether these populations, either the household type or the housing type, is adequately served, is it underserved or overserved? Consider if there's differences by income level. That doesn't necessarily need to be part of the analysis, but it's something that you could consider. And then tell us what you feel. And again, we want to hear your top 3. Doesn't mean you can't provide more information later, but again, for the purposes of tonight's meeting, would like to make it through top 3. And then I will record it as we talk, and then go from there. At the end of everybody's input, I think I'll turn it over to Chair Collins to see if we want to have either kind of a summary discussion or just move on into the strategies. So maybe think about that.
And also just for your top ones, if there's some compelling either data that you saw or something you've experienced that makes you indicate why, would be interesting to know too, for something, if that comes to your mind.
And that's a great point, because we do have a mix of commissions here, so we would love to hear some further explanation on that.
I try not to say anything, but I was reading the chart that's up on the board there. You say we pick 3 priorities, but is that 3 that are well met and 3 that are not, or can I have a priority that's well met and then 2 that are not?
Yeah, so we'd prefer each commissioner to provide us 3, and you can mix between what you think is met or not met. I think those are equally important, to be honest. But my guess is that most commissioners will probably focus on the areas that we haven't met. But that's up to each commissioner. And but I do really want to restrict it to 3 so that we can assign 3 to each of the tables.
So hopefully a clarification, well, for me, but for others maybe. So we'll pick 3 of the rows. Each of the rows have several columns. Do we assign ups and downs arrows for each of those cells within each of the 3 rows that we pick?
If you'd like to break it down that way, that's fine. But I think of it in the sense that I've given you 3 triangles. You have 3 triangles in your hand right now. And whether you turn it up or down is up to you, and which cell you apply it to is also up to you. Yeah, we do want to keep it to 3. Okay, so with that being said, I will look to Chair Collins to start the process.
Let's start, sorry, Rasheen, to put you on the spot, and we're going to start on my right.
Sure. I'm going to attempt to give some intelligent input. I have to admit being very confused.
It's okay. I think all of us are.
I have to admit that I'm one of those people that if I don't understand the great big picture, or I really don't understand what I'm doing. So I can give you 3 priorities. I just have a hard time then seeing where this all fits in, and then how much impact this is really going to have down the road, right? And so when we look under a household type, I can tell you I think all of these categories are priorities, right? So I can give you 3 categories that I think I would like to work on, or I think the city should like to work on. You know, when I look at households experiencing homelessness, when I look at people with disabilities, and I look at senior households. So if I've got 3 triangles and I can change them, so senior households, I would say that they have got to be underserved in any and all categories. So I would take that triangle and I would put it in the any column and I would turn it down. Is that what we're looking for?
That's perfect.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Okay. People with disabilities, I would leave it as it is. I would say it's poorly underserved, and the same with households experiencing homelessness.
So all 3 being underserved.
Yes.
Thank you. That's precisely
Okay.
the intent.
Phew,
Excellent.
I passed the test. So then, do you need housing type, then 3 under housing?
Yeah, let's just do them at the same time.
Should do housing type as well at the same
All right,
time?
let's go back. Go ahead, Rituja, you do these ones. That way we don't have to go back and forth to the tables.
Okay, so my top 3 concerns or something that I would like to see is household type for couples with or without children, which includes empty nesters and other couples.
Okay.
Couples
In the any column?
in the any column. Yeah, I'm just going to stick with any column because I think, yep, I'm just going to stick with the any column. Then couples with children, small families.
Okay. As underserved?
Yes, that's something that we would like to see in the community.
Okay.
And then I do have senior households. Okay, I'm going to go with senior households.
As a gap area?
As a gap area, and when we come to housing type, I'll probably have a clarifying question for
Sure.
you.
Thank you.
I think the demographic information you provided was fantastic. My ones that I would like to see would be couples with and without children, and the senior households. While any is a good column for it, especially in the moderate, is what my interest would be.
Okay. I think you said 2 things there. So you said couples without children. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
As the any column?
Yeah.
Okay. And then
Couples with children, it could be in the any column, but especially the moderate column.
especially the moderate. I'll put that in the moderate column.
And the senior households, especially in the moderate column. Your example about the seniors who want to move out of their expensive house but can't find a house to buy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and CJ?
I would choose the senior housing.
In the
Households?
any column?
I would put in the low.
Okay.
And then I would put couples with children in the moderate.
Okay.
And people with disabilities.
In all categories?
Pardon me?
In all categories?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so when I look at the income and housing affordability guidelines and look at these different income levels, and I apologize for getting caught up in that component of it, I see that at 120 AMI, affordable purchase price of $450,000, right? So you're saying that 120 is moderate or middle?
The middle. It would fall in the middle. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's too bad we couldn't pick like this down or something like that. But so I guess I'll put small families, middle income, underserved. I'm sure the downsizing, the any on the downsizing, I know that that's been an issue throughout.
Okay.
Which I guess I'm not sure what empty nester and senior house, how much gap there is between years, right? But I suppose that seniors would also be underserved in probably the any category.
They go fast, right? Thank you.
Okay, I'll start. I'm going to focus on families, and the reason for that is just because the data, especially in figure one that shows married with children, represents 49% of Sammamish, which is pretty high and a lot higher than most of King County. So I'm going to say that couples with children, small families and large families in the very low income. So I not only want to address the part that families make up a big part of Sammamish, but also that we need to provide the very low income families. I'm assuming that those are the people that would be working in Sammamish and would like to live in Sammamish also, especially if they have young families. It would be nice to live and work in the same place, so I'm going to focus on that. And for the same reasons, the single-parent family, focus on the very low. And I also want to use the households experiencing homelessness in the any category, because I feel that, you know, any households with or without children always, you know, may need temporary assistance or emergency assistance, and I think that's important.
Thank you.
Okay. One of the things, I did write an opinion article for the local newspaper on homelessness, and I really like this term because that's one of the things that is out there. They're not homeless, they're experiencing being homeless. So I like that, and actually, there's my first one with a down arrow and any. Then I saw something that we have an interesting demographic in the city of Sammamish, but I think both empty nesters and people moving back into their families is not so much a trend, it's happening. Okay, so I want to extended multi-generation families in any with a down arrow, needs addressing.
Okay.
And then the final one, which is easy, and you probably could guess that, would be senior housing.
In the
In any.
Any category. Okay. Thank you.
I guessed it.
All right. I looked at senior housing under any. Single parents, I can speak from experience because I was there, especially low.
Okay.
And then single living alone, I think very low.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, my three are all down arrows. The first one is couples without children in the any column. I think if we want to continue to see people coming into and moving through Sammamish, that we need to have options for people who are newly married or people who are empty nesters, both. Single parent family in the any column. I think it's pretty tough for a single parent family. I don't think there's too many single-parent families in the high-income category anyway, so, but I think we see a lot of that, and that would be great to create better opportunities for them. And then the other one is couples with children in the moderate column. I know quite a few like that struggle with, you know, they are not necessarily high-income, but they definitely belong in our community, so I think that's an opportunity to make some improvements.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I don't think I did it right. I picked 3 out of the columns and 3 out of the rows. And I'm concerned about people in the very low, low, and moderate columns. And my main priorities are single-parent households, senior households, and people with disabilities.
Single parent family,
Single-parent households, senior households, and people with disabilities.
Okay. And the any columns for all of them.
I guess if you're going to make me do that, but I kind of like very low, low, and moderate.
Right. In the, okay. Thank you. So I hope that hopefully gives you a sense of what we're looking for when we go to the next table. But before we do that, I do just want to make a couple comments on the assignment of the arrows on this particular table. And I'll, if you guys have anything to add. I think what we're hearing is the any column got a lot of attention, and I think that's kind of a recognition. It does somewhat align with what we had said for a few of the categories there in our city identified table as part of Exhibit 1. So I don't know if you guys have any additional takeaways or
So
off the cuff.
all of you have there and see if you have, so I put a question to you, not a question to me. How do you feel when you see the sort of data-driven where we only gave you a couple choices, so you had to prioritize? I do see a scattering throughout. I mean, so I'm not saying I've seen it, but I'm kind of curious how you react to what this looks like cumulatively, given you are each, you're all limited to 3 votes each, but how does that look and feel to you? Are we getting in the right ballpark? Are there certain cells up there that when you look at the previous version, you wonder, how come something like that did or did not happen? And just as a question.
Well, yeah, like maybe do we really need down arrows on all the unrelated, in the row for unrelated roommates, for example? I mean, I don't want to not put it on there, but then again, how does the data say that we really have a problem with that particular demographic? I'm not sure.
But to some extent, we did hear 1 or 2 people make the comment about young people. A couple made comments about people being able to come into the city. One in ownership mode and another just children coming home, and you couch it as a multi-generational issue. I don't know if I heard a couple people alluding to workforce. And so whether or not under that, but it's not called out explicitly workforce here, and I don't know if that's something I would maybe point out, is that in some of your commenting, because I did hear a few of you qualify and say, I mean, I'm like the single parents, especially the lower income, because I assume they're working in the community. And so maybe the question there is not so much unrelated roommates, but that's almost a solution to single people on limited income. That's how they get by sometimes. And so the question is, from a household type perspective, you do show living alone, young adults and other singles. Somebody did show a very low income arrow there. So that there's probably a correlation between those two.
Okay. Stanley?
Just a quick question. Is there anyone that responded under the any who felt like they needed to include the upper under that any column? Otherwise the upper might not apply.
I would say absolutely yes.
Okay.
I
wasn't sure.
In fact,
Say yes to
what I get out of what I see us putting up there is that, and I see what I want to see, of course, but what I see with so many annies is that what it reflects is that we have one basic type of housing in this community, and we don't have a variety of choices, whatever the income level may be, and that's perhaps what we need to focus on.
Correct.
Exactly what the data says too, right? That we have all single-family homes.
Can I ask a clarifying question? And when you're saying that, you mean at all income levels?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you're somebody that wants to come into Sammamish and buy a 2-bedroom house,
Right.
I mean, there's probably 1 or 2 that if you're willing to spend money fixing it up.
And what I guess I'm saying is some people, you do have some that are called out by income level. And especially, in other words, I think we see like couples with children, we see in everybody, but it's sort of like, yeah, it's everybody, but in particular, probably a harder to serve of that, all those different columns is moderate. That's a particular interest why we do all. Others just have any for all of the income levels. But I just want to make sure that when you say any, you're equally weighing low, moderate, market, and upper when you're saying that.
I'm no more equally weighing anything than the data does. What I'm saying is that if you want something other than a 4-bedroom house with a 3-car garage, your choices are limited. And I think the fact that we put so many down arrows in the any column reflects that. And in fact, the down arrows in the moderate income on the families is just a reflection of affordability in that category because we have a challenge there. But the bigger challenge beyond that is not just affordability, it's availability of anything in those other categories that would suit their needs.
And I'm still going to try to ask my clarifying question again, I'm just trying to, which is, so for an example, your 2-bedroom home, if they all came in and they were all expensive, would you feel fulfilled, or would you be feeling more fulfilled if there were 2-bedroom homes that were at different price points?
Your question is a bit of a trap, but I'll answer it anyway.
Okay.
You would always, I believe, want a variety of housings at a variety of affordability.
Okay.
Absolutely. But I think that the first step is if you have zero availability, then affordability may be less of an issue. Because if you have zero, you have zero.
Right.
So if we built something and we had some two-bedroom homes that were available for somebody, that would be a step in the right direction. Then, if we can build those and have some affordability, that would be another step in the right direction. And it's a more granular analysis.
Right, and when we get to, and the reason why I'm sort of probing on this a little bit is when you get to the strategies that may become relevant. Okay, in other words, making that, and I'm sort of doing this because I've just been through 6 months with a citizens group in Kirkland, a group about your size, and they finally did get to that point of understanding about that, and that's why I want to just put it out there for food for thought. And you're right, to some extent it's supply and choice, but the other is, but do we also try to find opportunities in our affordable strategies to make sure we're hitting some of these categories as well? Okay, thank you.
So should we move on to the second?
Yeah, that'd be great, because
And we'll go the opposite way. We'll start with Commissioner Garrison.
What are we doing now?
So same thing,
exercise.
just for the housing type.
Right, for the housing type.
My screen just went out. For housing type, well, I wasn't ready. I
Maybe
wanna see
Commissioner
mixed-
Boffman, if you're ready.
I want
Oh.
to see mixed use, mixed use, not just multifamily, but mixed use with other services, and that isn't a choice, is it?
So I think that would probably be most appropriate under the walkable, the shopping, services, and employment.
Okay, I want to see that.
Okay.
Housing type, small homes, I think, and ADUs under multifamily. I think that's a priority, and
So
Doug, right below. Yeah.
this under the
you
ADU.
want 3?
Okay. Yes, please.
What do you mean by group homes?
So group homes is a category, a type of housing where, generally speaking, there are services associated with some level of need for those services for the residents on site. I don't know if there's a better.
So it might be healthcare or something like that?
Right, it's generally for people with disabilities.
Okay, I'll say group homes.
Commissioner Boffman?
Thank you.
My 3 are, of course, down arrows. One is under the any column of single-family attached. The next one is multifamily. Again, these are all in the any column. And the third one is the ADUs, homes under 1,000 square feet.
Great, thank you.
So for my first one, I do have single-family detached under any.
Okay.
Oh, excuse me, that should be attached. My mistake.
Okay. As a down arrow.
Yes.
Okay.
Then senior housing, any, down arrow.
Okay.
And multifamily, down arrow, any.
Thank you.
This is becoming easier for me, and thanks, fellow commissioners. Single family attached in any column, down arrow. And, well, I'll drop down, make senior housing in any, down arrow. Multifamily rentals in the down arrow, any.
Any column, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so mine are also single-family attached in the any column, multifamily rental in the any column, and homes under 1,000 square feet in the any column. And my data backup for that is figure 5, where it shows that only 13% of house or homes types in Sammamish are 2 bedrooms or less. So it's pretty minimal.
Thank you.
Okay, so down arrows, single family attached, moderate and middle, and any under the homes under 1,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
CJ?
I would pick single family attached. These are all down arrow, and these are all under any.
Okay.
Multi-family rental and emergency shelter.
Thank you.
Excuse me, mine are under single-family attached. I specifically like the one-floor units. I don't know if that's called a condominium or a townhouse. Also,
Could you explain why you're putting that qualification on?
I guess it's the friendship level of townhouses being also walkable for all ages.
Okay.
The homes under 1,000 square feet, especially the accessory units and the cottages that we're hearing about so much. And my third would be the independent living senior housing, specifically not something like Bellwood, but something that allows people to live in the same kind of setting.
Thank
And
you.
these are all under any. Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.
Single-family attached, homeownership, multifamily rental, and transit-oriented.
And these are all down arrows in the any column?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think with transit-oriented, there are going to be some restrictions, but but I think we can tackle that as we go through the strategy.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, Doug, these are all going to be in the any column with a down arrow, single family attached, homes under 1,000 square feet, particularly ADUs. I think that's a huge opportunity for the city, seeing as it's so underutilized, and senior housing.
Great. Thank you. I think we picked up steam toward the end, and I think there's a good dispersion of responses here. So maybe I'll channel Arthur and just say if there's any immediate reactions from the commissioners.
I just wanted to say, I think I've always, a lot of people advocate that when you accomplish something, celebrate it. And I think we should celebrate this group, 10 people. Maybe another day with 2 or 3 less or more people, they might be different decisions, but we did something. And we should be proud of taking which might have been a daunting task, and it looks pretty good. So I think we should pat ourselves on the back, and hopefully this is also helpful.
It is. Thank you, Commissioner Crandall. I think the important part for us is that we're taking little steps along the way with each of these meetings. So it might not seem like, it might seem silly or it might seem unimportant, but these things actually help us build up to a proposal. So we're getting there. And I think as we start talking about the strategies, which is coming up right now, that'll really feel, I think it'll feel like a jump for the commissioners. So hopefully it's a good sensation, but it might seem like a small thing, but we do take these types of input from the commissioners very seriously. So thank you.
And I think what this shows is that we need to focus on the diversity of housing and providing the single-family attached, the multifamily rental, the homes under 1,000 square feet. It's very clear. And, you know, even though the senior housing is broken out and the transit-oriented is broken out, it doesn't mean that we can't build small homes by transit. It doesn't mean that we can't do multifamily in a walkable shopping service area, right? So these are not mutually exclusive activities. They can all be grouped together, but really what we're talking about is we need smaller houses if we build them then we will have more supply and affordability will come as that transpires. So that's kind of what I take from this exercise.
And you just made a point I think I'd want to, whenever you do things that I think are worth reinforcing, to remind you to keep doing, or you will probably keep doing. You just sort of did a qualifier within this chart that sort of helped gave it some more meaning to you. And as we're going through strategies, I mean, this chart is meant to be a tool for you as you go forward. But as we go forward and we start talking about strategies and thoughts like that pop up, the important thing is to keep noting those, because all of those comments, just like what you just made there, that's what helps give flavor to the strategies, to help give a little more shape to them and why you are recommending things you are. And you may find at times that maybe you'll have a conversation around strategy which makes you want to go back and refine the chart a little bit or add notes to the chart. Because here, we're not only trying to create graphics and stuff, but we're helping you build the story that will help lead to understanding the strategies a little bit more. Okay? So it's always sort of this cyclical kind of conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just had a quick comment. I think, when I'm listening to all the other commissioners, I think we're bringing in a lot of personal experience into this. And I think one of the gap areas, maybe it's deliberate or not, or I don't know if it's just a reality, I don't see our kids living here. You know what I mean? There was a column here for college students and, young adults, and I don't think we even could, hope for them to live here. So I think, I don't know if it goes into the strategy, but it's one of those things I think we should keep at the back of our minds when we're going through the strategy ahead.
Okay. So the next thing we will do is talk about the potential housing strategies. I don't feel like we need to have a talk or a presentation on neighborhood character. We can just go into it with the strategies, but does anybody feel like you need sort of a primer from staff to talk about, what neighborhood character means in the housing strategy?
Yeah, and if I could just add something real quick, that was there were two main reasons behind calling that out specifically in the agenda bill memo. One is that we've been hearing direct input very, very clearly that we want to talk about neighborhood character. We have a lot of people, not just commissioners, members of the public. I hear it all the time. So we need to address it directly. There's no two ways about that. And I was going to say this for later, but we have started the housing survey, and there has been a pretty good response. We have over 320, I believe, responses today. So that, in my experience, that's the best survey I've ever done. So usually you get like 70, maybe 100. This is really good. So the reason why I bring that up is because we are hearing about neighborhood character in that too. So people are prioritizing that in their responses. We are also getting emails to the housing email address that specifically talks about neighborhood character. So there's no two ways about it. We want to talk about it. Now's the time. And again, it's one of the 5 categories. So they're equally important categories. Neighborhood vitality and character is one of them. So just want to state that before we get into this discussion. And really, the next 5 slides that I have are just a description. It's more of a reminder or refresher for the commissioners to rephrase how you think about these potential strategies. Sometimes we planners tend to use terminology that we use frequently that maybe members of the public don't think of it in the same manner or don't understand it quite the same way. So I want to give just a quick refresher on what we mean when we say these things. But before that, just a real quick, broader reminder, which is that the task at hand is to identify strategies. The strategies relate to our housing policy. They're rooted in our housing policies, and they address the areas of need, which is that exercise we just did. Again, those strategies collectively will become our work program over the next 5 years. And in doing so, we're identifying the strategies. We're not necessarily developing those strategies into solutions. So if you identify a code amendment as part of a strategy, we are not going to develop the code amendment. We are going to tell council, this is our plan. This is our priority. We feel this is important. We need to work on this in the next 5 years. And then council will add that to our work plan, and we will develop that in the short term and come back with proposed solutions. So just hopefully that helps you frame it. We're not tasking you with telling us how to solve any sort of issues that we have. We're identifying them. Okay, so I gave a brief little primer on it, but neighborhood vitality and character. When we say that, some of the commissioners, I believe 4 of the planning commissioners were around when we did talk about neighborhood character as some potential solutions based on city council direction at the end of 2016, I believe. So it's been a little while, but this is always a topic that we hear about in the community. Concerns with the urban form of the community. That's generally what people are talking about. But it's not just urban form, it's demographics, it's economics, it's the natural features of our community. So it means a lot of different things, and it means different things to different people, which is why it tends to be a harder goal to achieve, because we're talking about an extremely diverse range of opinions. And none of them are more important or less important. It just, those are facts that we deal with. So. However, when you talk about the way the community looks, a lot of times we can get at that through our zoning code. So for instance, a neighborhood vitality and character strategy might be to talk about minimum lot size, or it might be to talk about setbacks. It might be to talk about design standards. It could be an array of strategies that we look at to get at the end goal of making the community a vibrant place to live. So that I'll leave you with that, and then I'll go through the other ones, and then we'll open it up. One of the other categories is housing supply and variety, and generally what we're talking about is the mix. We've talked a little bit about this tonight, but we're talking about what is the housing supply? What does it look like? Are there ways that we could help diversify the housing stock to address the needs that the commissioners have identified? Are there things that we can do, whether that's a code, a regulation, or is it something that we address more broadly in our policies about how we grow? Where are we growing? How are we growing? Those types of things. And I think that generally when we talk about that, we're talking about new growth. We're talking about encouraging certain types of housing. So senior housing might be one of those. But housing supply is always really tied to and a function of jobs. It's a function of job growth and economic development. So those tend to be pretty closely tied together. In the past, Arch has given some commentary on the jobs housing balance. That's definitely part of this. So that's what we generally mean when we talk about housing supply and variety. The third category I'll mention tonight is housing affordability. That tends to be an easier to understand topic, but there's really 2 prongs to this. One is, generally speaking, is our housing affordable? And when we say affordable, we mean, do households pay 30% or less of their household income on gross housing costs, and that includes utilities. So that affects all ranges of households. It's not just low income, it's everybody, all the way up through the $1 million households. Are they paying 30% or less on their housing? That is considered affordable. Now, the other prong is the quote-unquote low-income housing. So that generally breaks into moderate, low, and very low income brackets. And we, again, touched on this a little bit earlier tonight. We refer to the area median income, the AMI, when we talk about these breakouts. And in those cases, that is those households spending 30% or less of their household income on gross housing costs. So that's what we mean when we talk about housing affordability. One of the other categories is special needs housing, and I gave almost this exact slide to the Human Services Commission a couple weeks ago, and it's easy to say special needs housing, but that breaks out into quite a few categories. One is elderly, 2 is people living with mental, physical, and/or developmental disabilities. There are also people with alcohol or other drug addictions, people living with HIV/AIDS, victims of domestic violence, and people who have been discharged from institutions. So it does cover a broad range of people. And this category paired with the previous category is what we really would implore the Human Services Commissioners to provide their expertise when we talk about these strategies. And then, of course, one that tends to get forgotten in the conversation is the regional collaboration. So this is truly an important strategy because we are part of a growing region. We all know that. I don't need to tell anybody your experiences. Everybody is experiencing this, whether that's through traffic, whether that's through your neighborhoods being developed. It's a fast-growing region, and we are one city in a large region that is basically leading the nation in some categories of growth. So it's pretty unprecedented times right now. But there's internal forces and external forces that we deal with. And when I say internal, I mean something like, for instance, right now we have a development moratorium. That's an internal force affecting the way we're growing, and that has regional implications as well. When I say external, it might be Microsoft deciding to expand their Redmond campus. That's something that we don't have any control over. That's an external force. That Microsoft is making that decision based on their external forces. So there's all these things that are happening, both internal and external, that really we need to be involved in, because the more you grab the bull by the horns, the more you can manage the growth, the more you can get what you want out of it, because it's not an easy topic, and it requires a regional approach. And for that matter, it's actually required by state law. So we do have to, we are absolutely required to coordinate regionally. And we do that through our work with King County. We also do that through our work with the Puget Sound Regional Council on a multi-county basis. So we do it kind of in a two-part way. There's also the state through the Growth Management Act. So this is all just a way of saying that we're part of a bigger issue. Okay, so with that being said, I would hope that the commissioners can now refer to Exhibit 2, and hopefully you've had a chance to look through the what I will call the quote-unquote universe of strategies. But when I say that, I do want to acknowledge that we want to hear your ideas too. Think outside the box in this case, but hopefully these categories help you frame up your discussions. I think we'll have just a kind of a preliminary discussion here, and hopefully by the time we come back to the next joint meeting in May, at the end of May, I believe it's May 24th, we'll have a more refined list that we can start talking from. And I won't quite call it a draft, but I want you to know that we will be coming back with a more refined list based on input we're hearing tonight and input we hear between tonight and the 24th, which includes the survey, open house, additional Human Services Commission meetings as well. So with that being said, I will stop talking and turn over to Chair Collins.
Okay, so I thought that the best way to work on this tonight and to get some input from each person would be that we do this round robin style, and we can either go, sequentially, or Larry can keep track. He's got this golf score thing over here, and he can kind of keep track of who's said something and who hasn't. And so the idea is that, or my idea is that each person, based on what we have in Exhibit 2, you could either offer a comment on one of those strategies that's been proposed in this exhibit. You could, in support or not in support of one of these existing strategies. You could introduce a new strategy, something that you are interested in and that you don't see in the matrix. And I had a third thing, and of course I can't remember what that is. So the idea is that we keep our comments relatively short and that we keep it moving, so we hear a lot of different things from a lot of different people in a short amount of time. So with that, does anybody have any questions about what we're trying to do?
I'd like to.
Just like to ask is, when I've looked at this a few times, but
and there's a lot in there, so
yeah, I see some things in here which appear to me to be good strategies, but they've never been pursued. Let's say that. And so part of my question is, in some respects, I sort of feel like some of my comments are, well, yeah, can't we just actually do that? Some of them may be, yeah, here's a new idea or a tweak on this, but there's a lot of content in here that it feels like has never really been, never become a priority, never set as an objective by council or whatever. How do we kind of deal with that difference between discussing new ideas versus what we need to do to prioritize the things that are already here?
I think that's the whole, idea of what I wanted to do tonight, is to get an idea from you. I see a few things on here that I'm saying, yeah, let's do this now. Why haven't we done it yet? And, so there's things like that. And then there's other things we might not get to it. Then I say, well, we're probably never going to get to that. So, but let's just start talking about it and see what we come up with, and let's see how it goes. If it's not working after a while, you guys just tell me, and we can stop. But I thought we'd try.
I guess I would also say it would be appreciated if there's a reason why something that got on the list has never been pursued, that we know that. If it's just it hasn't come around yet, fine, but if there was
Right.
well, this would have never worked, or, so we don't spend time talking about things that may never happen.
That's true.
So if I could ask a question or make a comment, I think it's fine to sort of give some observation of strategies, but I think the first step, we want to make sure, especially because we have some new people who are just sort of jumping into the fray here, that people, when they read this, they understand what the strategies are, or if they have clarifying questions about what they mean and stuff. And some of it might even be your question about, gee, is there any particular reason other than that you can only do 10 things and it wasn't in the top 10? Or is there something local that in the past has prevented us from ever looking at that? But I think we want to make sure everyone feels equally grounded in understanding strategy. So I would like to make sure people do ask clarifying questions about any of the items on here. And also your point about if you have some that you see as are missing, or why isn't this on the list? That is that I think is as important as any other comments for tonight in particular.
Okay.
I would like to get some direction to where in all this massive material we have been given, where we're going to find the strategies. I can't find it.
Is that everything from page 21 onward?
Correct.
All of those?
Exhibit 2, yeah. So in the table between pages 20, so the user guide is page 20, and then all the way through.
No, it looks like this.
Yeah, that's not it. CJ, what you have is not.
Do you want us to start with just the housing theme, neighborhood vitality and character? Or do you want us to look at the whole strategy, these multitude of pages all at once?
See everything at once. Because if we break it up,
We're doing exhibit 2, right?
I don't think we'll make it.
Maybe with the chair's guidance, if we started with in one direction and kept going around, we'd all know where we're at, and also the scorekeeper would, yours truly would know what's going on. So I would recommend start with Stanley here. I think he's ready. And
You know what? Actually, why don't I start? Because then I'll kind of give an example of what I'm talking about.
be nice.
So for me, it's housing supply and variety, and it's mixed-use design standards. And I really used to focus on community design standards, but when I came across this mixed-use design standards, I thought, oh, that's important, because what we want from what we've seen tonight is we want these smaller attached units, townhomes, and I think what the community would appreciate if we decide that those are the types of buildings that we want to build, we want to make sure that they are high quality, that they look good, that they fit in with the community. And so to me, that's something that is really important. So that's my first one. So we'll go to my right, Eric.
Do what I'm supposed to do here, but there was some
You can also ask questions if you want.
discussion earlier, right? So there was some discussion earlier about kind of what has been tried, what hasn't been tried, and one comment that I would have, it would help me to have 2 more columns, and that would be something about like what of these things can staff do with just do, right? And which things are going to require the council to take some action. And that might help us all identify maybe I don't know, bottleneck's probably a bad term, but where these things are not moving forward. We have identified which things are going to require a lot of code changes, and it seems like the majority of them are, so it seems like a heck of a lot of work ahead of us for sure. So that would be one observation.
Right.
So.
Okay.
I would pass and come back. I need to hear some more.
Okay.
In my beginning reading, I really liked the community design standards. Now I'm not so sure what I mean by what I said. The other one, I question what the minimum density requirements as compared to maybe a maximum density requirement. Because we're already making things awfully close together around here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and give us a definition, Doug, of that.
Yeah, so we do in our zoning code have maximum density requirements. So we by zoning, our zoning map, when we assign, for instance, our urban residential zones break out between R1 and R18, and the numbers that associate with that are the maximum densities per acre that you can achieve. Okay. What the minimum density is as a strategy is really to emphasize the importance of that zoning, so that in, say, an R8 zone, you don't get just 1 unit per acre, you get what is really envisioned in that zone, which is closer to 8. So you might assign something like a minimum density so that you achieve a minimum and you have a maximum, so you get closer to, you kind of set a floor and a ceiling in that sense.
It's so that you can't build an R4 property in an R18 zone, basically.
It doesn't speak to retaining horse country, does it? I think I need to pass and let someone else speak, and then I'll collect my own thoughts here. Thank you.
Okay. So I have a few comments under housing supply and variety. I think, when we're discussing, I think we're very aspirational and we want to do certain things, but when we look at the strategies, or some of them have been true and tried and just not very successful, I would like to see, how I think, like Commissioner Eric also said, we would like to see, Commissioner Brooks said, we would like to see if they were successful or not. Because, for example, with ADUs, I know we have a strategy in here, but as far as I know, there haven't been many applications for permits for that. And then I had some questions or, concerns about number 11 and 12, where it says SEPA flexibilities. And I certainly would not want to see any environmental rollbacks happen, or, because I think that is something we need to be really aware of. So I know they were not here in 2016, so I would like to understand a little bit more on that, to say what does that mean. And also actually try to understand what the prefabricated and new building technologies mean, because I think new building technologies are always good. I think, I would like to see more technologies which are for which make us more sustainable. But the word prefabricated immediately brings to mind like those construction pods and houses like that. So we definitely, I wouldn't want to see that.
Ratuja, I don't mean to cut you off, but we're kind of trying to do like one comment at a time.
Okay, all right. So I just have like two more on the same, just last one. It's on the parking policies and off-parking policies and standards. I'd like to understand what that means as well.
Yeah, so this is actually kind of relevant because it's been in the news recently.
Yep.
With regard to the city of Seattle. But one barrier that tends to be seen by affordable housing developments in particular is stricter off-street parking standards. And that in urban areas might mean a parking lot, but it could also potentially mean structured parking, which is far more expensive. Generally speaking, you're talking like between $30,000 and $50,000 per stall. So those are obstacles that significantly impact affordable housing development. So that's generally what we're talking about.
Thank you.
I had two things, and they've been mentioned already, but community design standards, I think that's something we really, I think as a city, that's what I hear all the time about new development going up. And particularly when we're talking about potentially offering more, townhomes, condominiums, apartment buildings. What I'm seeing in other cities like down in Issaquah, where I see a lot of apartment buildings going up, to me, growing up in Europe in the 80s, they look like, they look like old Soviet Union housing. And I don't think that enhances anybody's town in any way. Not to be disrespectful to the architect, but I think we should really, really consider that when we're looking at that type of housing. The other thing that's of interest is the ADUs. I think when we're talking about, we were talking about various types of housing here, so non-family member housing, if you're renting out a room to somebody, or college students, And as Rituja was saying earlier, you know, our children, when they go to college, will they be able to live here? ADUs may be a solution to some of those issues. And I think that's something worth talking about further and publicizing further. If it is something that the city already approves of, you know, do the general citizenry know that? And maybe that's why we haven't seen too many ADUs in the city, because maybe people are not thinking like that yet.
Right, like is it a public education issue or is it a code issue?
Right. Because the whole tiny homes thing is certainly something that's come out of this part of the country. I know it kind of started, I think, in the Portland area during the last recession, but I'm sure it's something people are very interested here.
Well, and in the actual matrix under housing theme, housing supply and variety, number 1. So for ADUs, it does say that a code amendment would be required. So they're talking about streamlining permits, revising existing ADU regulations to be more flexible, less restrictive, reduce procedural requirements, make ADU permits available on the mybuildingpermit.gov.
Yeah.
So they do have some ideas. We just have to say, yes, this is something we're interested in as a commission.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
Yes, and our code does allow it. And so the idea here is that maybe is this something that we want to look at for tweaking?
Maybe we need to add a public education component.
I think that might be a big part of it, and maybe that's something we hear about through some of the focus groups and through some of the surveys we do going further down this spring and summer.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Racine.
Sure.
Jane?
I'm amazed that the staff talked about getting complaints about community character or getting a lot of feedback on that. Is that on new development or is that in existing developments?
Right, most of the time we hear about new development, but it kind of spans a wide range of opinions, but it is something that comes up pretty frequently.
That just amazes me. When I look at a map, there's not much empty land left. Most of our boring neighborhoods are already built. And I went out and sat in one for a long, long time, one where not one car passed, not one person was outside. One of those 3 garage car ones with lots and lots of paving. And I tried to fix it. I drew, and I tried to design it. And when I got done, I hated my design because it didn't reflect what the people there might want. Maybe they like to be isolated. Maybe they liked it that way. Maybe they didn't like to keep up their yards. Maybe they didn't want to water them. It was August. It looked really bad. So I thought, what I would really like to see is a questionnaire. I would like to ask people these questions. And I want to know, and social and health services might have some of these answers or be able to ask these questions. What about loneliness? What about walkability? What about boredom? What about services in these neighborhoods? Are people happy with isolation or do they want more human contact? And I don't know. So I would like to know that. I would like that feedback. That affects the character for me more than anything, and it affects our existing neighborhoods.
I do think that some of that information will come out in the survey data. I'm hoping at least, and also in the, it's not just the housing survey, but they're also doing the branding survey. I think I went through a lot of those questions. I didn't see anything about loneliness, and you know, we can't really fix that anyway. So
we can.
Well,
we can.
But I don't know by housing, if housing strategy, is that really something we need to fix with all the other things that we have on our list?
It's part of character, it's part of vitality.
Okay.
And it's a majority of our city because it's already built. So to me, it's important.
Okay. Mark?
I have a long list, but I'll just pick a couple of them.
Yeah, just pick one or
think
two.
that,
We can go back around. That's the whole point, is that we keep going around.
Yeah, okay.
It's all right.
I would say that one of the things I've heard is that sometimes so we have a program that creates some affordable housing or requires some affordable units to be created, but I'm not sure that we've done a great job of tracking to make sure that those remain affordable over time. And if that's the case, then we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot by investing in creating things that then later turn over, if it's a unit, in a condo development or even an apartment, if those just turn over in 18 months to become market rate, then we've not accomplished our goal.
So if I can, and these are the kind of questions I'm really looking for tonight so that you understand what these strategies are, and we can provide that kind of background for you. And so to your point, yes, there are covenants created for any of those developments, either that get funding or that are done through land use or fee waivers, and there are covenants recorded on the property, be it ownership or rental, and they have long-term restrictions, rental for the life of the building, ownership for a minimum of 30 years, and then there's still some safety valves in there. And then by being one of the functions of ARCH is we then watch those properties over time, and they have reporting requirements so that we're trying to ensure that not only is that agreement made, but it's maintained.
I recall specifically an example of a person that was a project manager on one of these projects that's been recently completed, who came to a city council meeting.
I was at that meeting.
Yeah, and he described how...
And I'm not quite sure I would call that 100% accurate.
I guess I would like to then suggest as a strategy that the Planning Commission and the council get some kind of regular reporting, simple, but regular reporting that's being done, because...
We actually give annual report. We develop a report annually. We can't do that for ownership units because we can't say what has sold and hasn't during a current year. But for the rental housing, we do actually produce a report so that city, if they have a rental property, and that we give to the cities that indicates to them if there's been any non-compliance on properties in the different communities. So that's a good point, and that is something we work into our workload.
So can you clarify that for owned properties?
Well, owned properties, you only check that. Rental properties we check every year because they set their rents and they have income of residents, and we actually check income over time of residents. With ownership, you only check at time of transaction.
So what happens if the transaction occurs and it doesn't stay as an affordable unit?
Then the covenant, which is recorded, would be able to use, and we would go to the courts. And be able to enforce if we found out a transaction occurred. But what we're saying is that, and it's because it's a covenant recorded, that sort of puts everybody out there who's involved with it on alert. But most owners know they have to contact us, or owners know to contact us and start the process. So for those, we don't do 100, we only deal with units that are in a transaction, for sale transaction in any current year. And that might be 0, it might be 10 in the difference in each city.
Would we be able to, maybe for some upcoming meeting, get a copy of the most recent report for Sammamish?
It's for the whole region. We just do one whole report because most properties are in compliance, and I'm not even sure any of your properties are old enough that they're included in the annual report. So it's more, it calls out where we found issues. Otherwise, it's a really, really long report. But yeah, we'll be happy to.
And you said you provide that to the city council?
No, we provide that with staffs.
To staff?
Yeah, not the councils.
Okay.
Go ahead on a few others.
Keep going.
So I agree mixed use is a priority in the city. Under ADUs in that group, I do see a need to give incentives to develop ADUs. But there's a little confusion between, on the development side, if it fits the neighborhood or if it fits the community. And that's two different things. My neighborhood has an ADU that got dropped in the front yard and doesn't fit the neighborhood, but it fits the community. So the ordinance allows for it to be there. And yes, the design standard met the design of the house, but it just doesn't have that neighborhood feel to it. So I think when we do incentives and we do development, we do need to look at the ordinance a little closer on development.
Thank you.
I'd like to end this up, so I would go to the CJ and Gloria, let them come. If they passed, then are they ready to now punt?
Go first, give them some time.
No, I think they had the time.
Okay.
Lost my place.
Well, Gloria, go ahead.
Looking at the housing theme affordability number 3 on page 24, dispersed affordable housing, specifically because it needs to be everywhere and not just defined as, hey, that's where the poor people live or the Section 8. The housing needs to look like other people's housing. So mixed housing can't just say, these are the rich people, these are the poor people. Yeah. That would be a real concern.
Thank you for that.
With a brief look at this that I've had, I would choose the community design standards. I've lived in Sammamish since 2004, and I would say the people that I've learned or met over that time and gotten to be friends with it, I think if they were making that choice, that's the choice they would make.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and I did type out in large print. I'm going to read quickly, and then we're probably close to have to extend. So here it goes. It seems that Sammamish should consider the concept of creating a sense of place rather than preserving neighborhood characteristics. There is only one city of Sammamish, and it is made up of many neighborhoods with a variety of characteristics. Most of our homes have rooms with different purposes and character. However, each room functions as a part of the overall house, and no matter which room we are in, we feel like we are in our home, and it has a sense of place. Again, it seems that the goal should be the creation of an overall identity for Sammamish. Hopefully, the branding effort will provide direction and substance for Sammamish's sense of place. As for part of the housing strategy for Sammamish, it may be significant to not change the characteristic of each neighborhood, but possibly create a new compatible neighborhood within the town center. One example should be examined was the construction in 1947 of Levittown, New York. This was one of our nation's first planned communities, which is said to have transformed suburbia. The construction of Levittown consists of building rows of relatively inexpensive two-bedroom houses at breakneck speed. All this formed the foundation of today's master plan communities, such as the town of Valencia, California, and other communities that capitalize on the notion of tract housing. Could this be done in the town center where the cookie-cutter homes might look alike, but the residents would have the opportunity for individualizing the interior of the home and in landscaping? A nearby example of this related concept would be the YWCA units in Issaquah Highlands, where there was cooperating agencies involved in the completion of this complex. Maybe it is time to investigate the possibility of a large amount of foundation funds earmarked for an affordable residential neighborhood in Sammamish's town center. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you for the nice prepared remarks. Okay, so I guess let me see how people are feeling. Do you want to go another round, or we'd have to extend the meeting if we go another round, or do you feel that we've hit whatever you feel like hitting? What do you think, Ratuja?
I was just saying, if we have comments afterwards, can we send it to you and the staff?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If there's, once now we've looked at it and read it, asked a few questions, send as many comments as you can think of to Doug. I know he wants to see them.
I would prefer that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you can CC me if you want to, or you don't have to. It's completely up to you guys.
So we would like to suggest, whatever conversation you want to have, but what we're used to a group doing is first understanding and then do a more systemized approach where you get to everyone vote on each section. So you're given like 3 dots for the first section and each of the 4, and everyone puts that up and you can see each other's results and then have a conversation around that. That way you make sure you're addressing all 4 or 5 of the subsections. You get a chance to get a feel for where people's initial reactions are. And we think that's a really helpful step. And if you think that feels like a reasonable thing to try to do at like the next meeting, then maybe what comments right now would be is to help either making some comment that would help set that up, or again, clarifying type questions on what's in here now. Because I think we're getting a sense of what some of your top thoughts are, but part of what we're trying to make sure you do here is look at all the range of strategies and make sure you address each section of those. And so we found that to useful exercises to kind of cut through a lot of that to set the context for a lot more conversation.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm new to the game. As a matter of fact, this is like the 3rd time I've talked housing in Sammamish. Where did the strategies come from that we were presented with tonight?
Great.
In
So
our packet?
the strategies you have, and in fact there's, is you have a current strategy now that was done, how many years ago? 10? Yeah, just over 10 years ago.
Right.
And all the ones that you see a Y in the second column were part of that housing strategy. Might have been slightly edited based on updates. Then you'll see a number that have N next to them.
Right.
And those come from, and both times we did the same exercise. And that same exercise is, this is meant to be as full a range of ideas that we can come up with for you to look at. It's not prejudging any of them. It's meant to be as comprehensive as possible, and therefore to give you the range of choices that might address your different policies and goals in your comprehensive plan. Where we got those from consist of working with cities in East King County, looking at a variety of housing toolkits from a variety of different regional players and other cities in the country and other players like that. And then as well as we're involved with other housing-related issue on countywide committees and stuff. So it's meant to just be as broad brush as possible. One of the comments I would make is you'll notice that in some areas, like homelessness is called out more explicitly, because 10, 11 years ago, homelessness wasn't being talked about so explicitly on its own. So some of the reasons why there's some of the new ones is there's themes that have emerged since 10 or 15 years ago that that there are new ideas that are out there, and that's why they've been added. And so the purpose of this list is not to shorten it, but figure out which ones make the most sense for your community.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we go ahead and do that exercise on the May 24th, I mean, the reason I wanted to do this is because it seemed like we needed to have a draft coming into our next meeting.
Right.
In May 24th. So I do think we've heard some valuable things tonight. We've heard a few people talk about ADUs, incentives, public education. What do we need to do to, incentivize people to actually build ADUs? We've heard a few different folks talk about design standards, and we've heard about the affordable units throughout, which I think is very important. And we've also, Larry just brought up the affordable residential neighborhood. I do feel like that hits the major categories for looking at that. And so I do think this has been valuable, but I would be very open to doing the exercise that you talk about at the next meeting. So if there's any information that any of the commissioners need in order to do that next time, let's let them know right now.
Well,
and or if there's other things when you read through this list that you don't see that you think should be on the list, that, and either that or through email, that would be helpful too.
Right, and we do need to extend the meeting.
Yeah, question whether we extend the meeting with the break or not.
Let's just extend it to 9.
I move to extend the meeting to 8:45. We can always quit soon.
I would like to just interject real quick. I would suggest extending the meeting longer than you may need because you can end the meeting sooner, but just to avoid to have to continue to extend the meeting because we do have public comment as well.
Okay. I will move to extend the meeting until 9 p.m.
Second.
There's a motion to extend the meeting to 9 and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say no? Okay. So we'll use the next, yes, Barry.
If we're going to extend to 9, can we take 3? Can we take
Oh, yeah.
3 or 5 minute break right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, I think we're ready to get started, get back to our meeting. So I guess I'm going to open it up one more time and make sure that all the commissioners have all the information they need to sort of revisit Exhibit 2 over the next few weeks and get really comfortable with it and come back with sort of your priorities and questions and thoughts and all that good stuff. So does anybody have any outstanding questions or thoughts?
I'd only just restate that I would be curious as a follow-up to find out why some of the areas, how do I want to say it, had been ignored. You
And
know, I
actually,
realize-
maybe we should focus on design standards. Would that?
Yeah, that would
Since
be
we've heard that from so many
absolutely.
people, and it was on the 2006.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
we could
been
hear
a long
li-
time, and there's
yeah.
not been, or maybe there has been things. It just, I think it's informative to us to know this area has not been pursued for this reason. And if there's 4 areas and the reason is just we didn't get to it,
That's okay.
that's useful to know. I
And
think
I
that just be,
think-
as we go through this, it'd be good to have that background.
At the beginning of this process, and because I'm looking at this one to see if it has the ranking from last time. Right, so I'm wondering, that might be helpful because you'll see how your cohorts 10, 12 years ago, what they put as number 1 and number 2 and number, I can't remember if you did 1, 2, 3. And again, it's because it's a long list and these are the things they thought were most relevant and that might be, maybe that, would that be helpful?
I'm just more interested in yeah, I mean, I admit correctly that the neighborhood character jumps out. It's been expressed to many people, by many people to me during my campaign, during conversations of follow-up. I'm curious why nothing seems to have been done with that. But there may be other ones too that would be a similar exercise to just say.
And part of
the
it, you may,
reason.
I mean, it's hard to answer all that, but, you know, staff.
Well, I'm interested hear from staff why
Right, that's what
why
I'm saying.
that's happening.
But
Not from Arch, from
Right,
staff.
but I'm just letting you know, for example, the town center plan took, as I was staff support on that, a lot of time was spent by the planning department for years on that issue on there. So it's a matter of workload. But yeah, I think that's a good question for staff to sort of.
Right, but it's 2018, and that was 2006.
Right.
And so why have some areas been ignored?
Right, yeah, and I think that's the nature of dealing with a strategy plan. It gets political at the back end. When City Council gets the recommendations from Planning Commission, they have the tough task of ranking and prioritizing, and they do that with a different perspective in the sense of budgeting, staff resources, staffing in general, and the work plan that they want to achieve by department. And so I think that's where, speaking more broadly, why some things that may be a low priority or maybe even a medium priority don't ever get taken up in the short term. It doesn't mean that some of the low priorities didn't happen at a faster rate than maybe something that was listed as a high priority. It's just the reality of doing the ranking and prioritizing in a political environment just means that sometimes things happen out of order, or they're not always linear, I guess is what I'm saying.
I'm a parent. I know sometimes the answer is just because.
Right. And so that, I think the point that has been made a couple times is that the design standards is an example of that, where it was listed on the 2006 housing strategy plan, and there might have been a few things that have been tweaked or addressed along the way, but nothing that has been implemented on a kind of a community-wide scale in terms of design standards. So that's kind of the long answer, longer than the just because.
I just wanted to make a quick point. I think the Planning Commission actually took up the topic of neighborhood character extensively last year, right? Or the year before that?
I wouldn't say extensively.
Oh, it wasn't?
Because we focused only on, what were they, buffers?
Setbacks?
Well, that was a different thing. That was bulk and dimensions. I guess we didn't look at that as part of neighborhood character.
Yeah, so it was.
That was a long time ago. The bulk and dimensions was like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
The neighborhood character buffers was maybe a year ago.
I think you're correct about that. Yeah, that there have been a couple things in the recent past that have been an attempt to address neighborhood character. But I think when we talk about neighborhood character, it's something that's pretty broad. So addressing it in kind of a piecemeal fashion doesn't tend to get the results that I think people want. And so if we can, through strategies, help us get toward a more comprehensive approach, that's always going to be a better thing. But then to Commissioner Boffman's point, that even if we do identify something, even if it is a high priority, even if it is a high priority in the near term, it still, for a variety of reasons, may not get taken up, but it could. So that's the attempt here, is that we identify and we prioritize and we do our best to develop that work plan for the short term.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
I was wondering if staff has, as I read through there's talks of sub-area plans and neighborhoods. Has there been any map formulated at all about kind of spatially about these things? I'm an architect, so I like to know where things are at, not just that they are there. So some kind of map where there's some starting, because I think that might help the whole neighborhood character conversation if we can kind of see where these neighborhoods are, and then identify the types of characters that currently exist in them, and then support that and build upon that, and not have this wholesale change, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, we do not have a map of that nature at this point, but that's a good idea, that in order to talk about character, you have to first define it, and kind of a step number one.
And we could look at that as part of a strategy, right? I mean, we need to go farther down that, but we can look at that as a strategy.
We can.
Creating sub-area plans could actually be a strategy. I think it's actually your first strategy, right?
It is actually listed. Yeah. That's correct. Yeah. And so when we say a sub-area plan, that's in a planning sense, that is a pretty distinct type of document. So we take a geographically defined area. For instance, the city of Sammamish has one sub-area. It's town center. So we delineate the boundaries of that, and then go through an entire planning process of developing implementation items, goals, policies, actions related to that area and its unique characteristics in the future that we want to see for that area, and then develop kind of on the back end, after we go through an environmental review process and the plan process, then develop some specific regulations related to that area based on the policies. So that when we say a sub-area plan, it's a specific type of planning document.
But that would mean creating sub-area plans for the other areas in Sammamish, not town center, right? Because we already have a town center plan.
That's correct, yeah. Okay. So town center was the city's first attempt at defining a sub-area
plan. At doing one.
And there are other areas in the city, and I think the language in the strategy is, it does identify the Inglewood and Pine Lake shopping centers. We could also probably throw Klahani in there too, that these are areas that for their distinct characteristics might necessitate some specific planning processes directly targeted to that area.
Okay. All right. If there's nothing further, I'd like to entertain public comment. Okay. So the next item of business will be public comment, and this is for agenda items. So people wishing to speak have 7 minutes to speak. Mr. Stickney?
Chair Collins, can I make a comment before Mr. Stickney speaks, I forgot. So in my, I think I alluded to this at the beginning, that I did want to make a couple comments at the end of the presentation.
yes.
One of them is kind of a timely request, and it's, I feel, a very important request. In our schedule on the screen right now, we have identified April 25th as the first open house. We would really implore the commissioners to attend that. I think that now that the commissioners have had some work sessions and been able to really start to dive into this topic, the value of having a commissioner at an open house is very high. So to the extent that you can attend, we really, really, really would like your attendance there. Kind of view it as like a quote-unquote community liaison role, talking to the public, kind of gaining public feedback, and considering that in your work on this plan. So that's my first request. At that open house, we will give you some of the actual data graphics for the housing survey. So that'll be the first chance for the public to see the housing survey results, which I think is also very important. This is a question for planning commissioners, but you'll notice at the very end of this table on July 5th is the Planning Commission public hearing on this topic. So it follows the holiday, and we recognize that. So I want to give everybody an early heads up that that is the identified date. If you have any conflicts, please let us know as early as you can. We want to ensure that we deal with schedules appropriately. So please let me know. And with that, I will stop talking and turn it back over. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Very important comments. And I will be at the open house, so hopefully everyone will have a chance to make it. It's from 6:30 to 8:30.
That's correct. It's on the city's event calendar. It is at 6:30 on April 25th in this room.
And it's in City Council chambers. Doug, what day is that? Is it a Wednesday or a Thursday?
It's a Wednesday.
A Wednesday.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for those comments. Mr. Stickney.
It's going to be a deep dive into the pool, but for the planning commissioners, it's a continuation of things that I've been saying at meetings. Kevin, can we get the slideshow up there? As Kevin gets that up, the city is actually guessing on housing gaps. And it's time that we use precise needs and wants gap numbers. And King County, PSRC, the state, GMA, all call to meet current and, I'll spit out the P, projected housing needs for all economic and demographic groups. And those are a good reason to. But the main reason, too, is this is about optimally meeting the needs and wants of all those living and or working within Sammamish over recurring cycles of life. That's what this is about. Our city's external target for regional growth is about 4,600 units. The hard fact to swallow, but it's true, our internal housing shortfalls based on wants and needs over a cycle of life are 2 to 4 times the size that number, and that's the issue. So what are housing needs and wants? Real short, you take housing supply less the need for about 50 specific categories which are coming up in this presentation, and then you find out you either have a oversupply of housing or the need has an oversupply. So you have a surplus of houses or a undersupply of houses. Wants are statistically valid surveys to determine how what people really want over a cycle of life modifies needs. We may find that some of our needs gaps are too low compared to what people want, and some are too high. These are the first 2 steps. On the staff presentation tonight, and I applaud all of you for adding many triangles to the any category. I have done a lot of work on this over time. Today, I can't go into that work, but any of you that would like to meet and go over the specifics, I have it. I've got the specifics which affirm that 70% or more of our internal housing deficiencies are from the 100% to 450% AMI category, and about 30% are under 100. This isn't wrong or right, it just is. These are things that I'll be happy to show over time. Said another way, there's about 8 economic groups for rent and for sale at 100% or less AMI, and there's about 26 economic groups and about 14 demographic groups that are above 100% AMI that all need to be studied for their gaps. Supply less need equals surplus or deficiency. And we know how to do this. In 2003, our comp plan actually calculated precise gaps in 3 categories at the 0 to 100% AMI, and we learned that we were 890 units short. This same approach has to apply to all 50 gaps in our city and then get refined by surveys. So on the sheet here, I'm outlining what the interpolation of the work that was done in our 2003 comp plan into today. This would be the economic and demographic groups to study based on that interpolation of what was looked at in 2003. So here's what we're solving for. I'm not solving or suggesting we solve for the regional target on growth. I'm solving for something else. Relative to recurring cycle of life, internal economic and demographic needs and wants of those living in 21,000 single-family homes and 4,000 workforce jobs, are the 4,000 smaller multifamily units we have built and planned for enough to meet an optimal range of needs over cycle of life? And the answer is no. The second part of the question is, based on absolute single-family build-out at about 26,000 homes or 25,000 homes, we ask the same thing. Again, this is something, no one really wants to hear, but our internal shortfalls are 2 to 4 times the size of our growth target. And I don't have time to go into it today, but there's a way to lessen single-family homes citywide, increase our centers, and decrease traffic, create financial wealth, environmental wealth, social wealth, and community character. That's for another presentation. We become more like a Mercer Island. We don't become Redmond or Issaquah. How do we do this? We have to pause the housing strategy plan. We have to do the needs analysis to find all 50 gaps. We have to do statistically valid surveys, and we means us as the city. We need to seek public input on the pros and cons of how would current land use contrast to internal housing balance over time. We need to discuss the consequences of those 2 paths over 5 years, 20 years, and cycle of life. We need to change our comp plan and then pick up the housing strategy plan that is guided by 3 numbers: the numbers to meet regional growth, the numbers to lessen oversupplies of single-family home citywide, and the numbers to increase smaller, different homes in our centers to meet the optimal range of internal housing over a cycle of life. That's it.
Thank you for your comment. Mrs. Wichter?
Hello, my name is Mary Wichter, and I live at 408 208th Avenue, Northeast in Sammamish. So during the break, I passed out my one-page handout. those of you who have seen me before speak, I tend to do a lot of research before I ever come in front of the mic, and I had done most of this research when the city offered the roundtable on growth, which was September 8th of 2016. What I did is I read the 2013 city study called the Buildable Lands Report, and what that is it has a map of Sammamish, and it has all the parcels on it, and then they have blue that are vacant, and it looks, when you look at it, there's like 10 to 20% of the land left. And I heard Ramiro Valderrama, who's a council member, said there's 14% left. So let's just say there's 15% left of the land. So the way that this top number got to be of 5,120 housing units is if you take the existing vacant lands and you have them at the current zoning, we can build about 5,100 homes, is what the Buildable Land Report was saying. And then Paul had talked about the external growth target. The external growth target given to us by the GMA was originally 4,000 the last time it was adjusted, and then for the 2035 it's 4,640, and about 50% of those are supposed to go into town center. And then I just don't hear people talk about it, but we have these job targets too, and I don't see how we're going to meet job targets of almost 2,000 jobs unless we do something and really build it in town center. So I'm just going to give you some other numbers. If you think about how Sammamish is, and you think about Redmond, and you think about Issaquah, and you think about Mercer Island, who are we the most like? Like, are we really like Mercer Island? And does Mercer Island have more big homes than we do? And the answer is Redmond and Issaquah, in the 2013 numbers, they were about 50% multifamily, meaning there's a lot of single-family homes, but there's a lot of other places to live too. And probably that didn't surprise you, and I would say with the amount of building going on now, this percent's going up. So if you think about Mercer Island is actually about 25 to 35% single family, which is a higher number than I would have guessed just from what I think I know about them. I'm not very smart, but I'm not very knowledgeable about Mercer Island there. But that was a number. So Redmond and Issaquah are more like this, and Mercer Island is more like this. And Paul even said that he thought we would end up being more like Mercer Island. So can anybody guess where Sammamish is on those percents? We're actually at 6%. 6% multifamily. And then because we annexed Klahani has multifamily, that takes us about 10%. So if you look, we're not even close to what Mercer Island was there. And the question is where did those numbers come from? So if you look at this, so before, in Sammamish, there were 1,000 multifamily units, and most of those are like across from East Lake High School or behind the Teen Center, which is the old library, or just up the hill there. And then there's some over by 7-Eleven, if you've ever driven there. If you don't know what multifamily are, that's what they are. And then Klahani has about 1,000 multifamily that came up. And looking through the packet tonight, maybe these numbers are a little bit too small. I don't know where your new numbers came from. So maybe this is 1,500, so it's 3,000 overall. But even if you did that, just adding the Klahani numbers, they doubled what we had in the city and only got us to 10%. So even if these numbers are off and they're 1,500, you're only going to get to 15%. So the really key thing to know from the town center is town center. On this line, it says that our growth target for external, not even asking about what the needs are, it's 4,640. And if you split that and you put 50% in town center and 50% not, the 50% that are not in town center will end up being single-family homes that are mega mansions, muck mansions, the big single-family homes with the 3-car garages and the 4 bedrooms. And then in town center, you'd only end up with that. Well, if I add the same amount, I'm never going to make this percent get bigger, and we need to get bigger. We were invented as a city from Redmond having too many single-family homes, and unless we do something to shift it, we're never going to get out of that percentage. So what needs to happen for town center or other places is we need to have more smaller homes. Paul was saying 2 to 4 times the number of them, and we need to have less single family. So we do need to do something. We need to rebalance something. We need to look at what's going in town center, because it's going to be really hard to build town center and build it right. But if we don't get it right, you're not going to want to redevelop it. So it's really important to go, it's a fruit bowl. What are you going to put in it? Big homes, little homes? How many little homes? How high? Where are you going to put them? And I just think that's so important. So I really like the discussions that you had. I think all your charts saying any weren't met. A lot of the comments that you had were right on. And you were talking about things that you might be able to do. I did hear from Director of Community Development, Jeff Thomas, that the development code, which is 19A in the Sammamish Municipal Code, that will be coming. It's on the work plan for 2018, so it will be coming. And so 21A, which is also the environmental standards for environmentally critical areas, both those are on the work plan and coming. So if you guys have ideas or you want to do that, it is in the work plan. And you, where you're sitting, you can actually say things and make changes for that. So I just wanted to give you these percents because I was shocked when I read them, and I really thought we were better off than Mercer Island when I found out we were worse, and I found out our numbers were so low. And even doing the Great Town Center plan, we weren't going to get there because we really need to have a lot more little units and a lot more smaller homes and the 1,000-square-foot homes. And then there's no way to make the jobs. I mean, how are people going to be able to live and work in the city? I mean, town centers are really, really key part of that. So this was Mary Wichter's understanding of all the research I did. And like I said, it didn't come from me. It came from the numbers in the 2013 city study called the Buildable Lands Report. And that was, so the roundtable did a really good job talking about that. And Jeff Thomas actually gave some of the presentations and gave that map. So I just wanted to share my insight with that, and I think it kind of dovetails with what Paul says, and I think it's dovetailing with what you guys have said tonight. So I appreciate the time to talk again. Thanks for listening to me twice, and hopefully some of those numbers will stick.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, we're just slightly over, so if there's nothing else, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So move, we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say no. And the meeting is adjourned at 9:03.